Hello guys, what's going on? Welcome back to my videos. In this video I'm bringing you guys the PvE Bloodline tier list. Now this has been a video that has been requested for a long time. I just have never gotten around to it. So here you guys go. For everyone that wanted to know the best bloodlines for farming in this game, this video is for you. So if you guys enjoy this video, remember to like, I'm more to get right to the video, guys. Alright, so just explaining the tier list a little bit. The bottom two tiers, it does not matter where they are in that tier. It's just all pretty much the same exact thing. So when it comes to Akuma, it's going to be extremely good for farming. You could actually do the C-spec glitch to one-shot NPCs, which is the main reason why it's going to be there. Goto Jokai is going to be not very good for PvE. While the first ability does a lot of damage, the other two abilities just aren't very good for farming. Astro's going to be the first. Do not use these for farming. Pretty much has nothing good to actually farm with. Azarashi's also going to be down here. Azipseko is going to go at the top, of not very good for PvE. It does have a little bit more farming potential than the ones below it, but it's still not very good. Bankai is usable for farming because it actually has a lot of damage output, and that's going to be the main reason why it's going to be usable. Black Shock, don't really need to explain that. Blood is going to be do not use these for farming. Pretty much Blood is mainly a PvP bloodline. Bolts is going to be at the bottom, not very good for PvE. The main reason why it's not going to be at do not use is because it does a decent amount of damage. Boramaki is going to be an extremely good for farming. It's going to be actually above Akuma. The abilities do a lot of damage overall, and every single one of the abilities can be used for farming. Bubble is going to be not very good for PvE. It's actually going to be probably above Goto Jokai, below Azipseko. When it comes to Bubble, it's not very good for PvE because the chance of the NPC staying inside of the bubble isn't very high. Now, when it comes to Clay, I'm actually going to put it in not very good for PvE. While it does do a decent amount of damage, it's just better to use other bloodlines. Cobra's going to be at the top of do not use these for farming. Cobra pretty much takes a ton of chi to use. There's pretty much not any reason to ever use Cobra because the C-spec drains your mode like crazy. Crystal's going to be at the bottom, do not use for farming. Nanga's going to be in not very good for PvE. As I said before, the order doesn't matter, so I'm just going to throw it in. Diva's going to be in do not use these for farming. Deusek is going to be in not very good for PvE. The stun actually works against some of the enemies, but against bosses it doesn't actually work. Eastwood Karashi is going to be in not very good PvE. It just doesn't have the damage output you need to actually farm. Emerald's also going to be in not very good for PvE. Besides getting the second ability glitch, there's pretty much no reason to ever use it for farming. Explosion is going to be a do not use these for farming. Pretty much Explosion just does a lot of damage. It has no hand size, but actually is very close ranged. Forge Red obviously do not use for farming. While it does a lot of damage in consideration to other bloodlines, it's just mainly a PvP bloodline. Frost is going to be not very good for PvE. Ghost Karashi is going to be usable for farming. Pretty much it does a decent amount of damage. Scorch is going to be with Frostfire. Lava is going to be usable for farming. It's okay for farming because it actually does multiple damage ticks to the bosses, but that's going to be about it. Giovanni Shisen, obviously extremely good for farming, has an insanely high DPS output. Gold Sand, do not use for farming. Hair's going to be not very good for PvE. I would recommend just staying away from this in general because Hair has been mega nerfed overall. Dark Man's going to be a do not use. Ice is going to be do not use these for farming. So is Inferno. Ink is going to be unusable for farming, probably above Ghost Karashi, below Bankai. When it comes to Ink, it actually has a good damage output, it has good stuns. Iron Sand, obviously extremely good for farming. It has the third ability glitch that you can actually do, and the C-spec and M1s are really good for farming in general. Eternal doesn't have the damage output, so do not use. Jiramaki is going to be not very good for PvE. Jokai, obviously do not use. Kakatsu is going to be not very good because it does a decent amount of damage, but actually isn't very good against NPCs. Kaiji is going to be extremely good for farming. The third ability is actually glitched out. I mean, the second ability is actually glitched out, so you can actually hit it multiple times against a boss, like a Xenodokai C-spec. Not only that, but the Z-spec of Kaiji is really good for baiting the boss away from you. Kamaki is going to be above Boramaki and extremely good for farming. Crowd is going to be not very good for PvE. It does a lot of damage, but overall it's just not very good for farming. Kadishi is going to be not very good for PvE. It doesn't have the damage output, and obviously the auto dodge isn't going to help you very much. Dokai, do not use for farming. Kanchu, do not use for farming, just because it really doesn't do that much damage overall. Light Jokai is going to be not very good for PvE. It used to be a lot better until they nerfed a bunch of the damage on it. Mech Spirit, obviously do not use for farming. It's mainly just a PvP bloodline. Minakami is the same way. Now, Minakaze is actually going to be unusable for farming. I'm actually putting it probably below Bankai, above Ink. Minakaze is actually really good for farming just because it does a lot of damage right now. Mud, obviously not very good for farming. Don't really need to explain that. Naramaki is actually very usable for farming. I'm actually putting Naramaki above Ink. With the second mode of Naramaki, it actually is very good. Not to mention the third ability has been buffed. Nature, obviously not very good for farming. Nectar is the same way. Otis Cyber is actually going to be right beside Akuma because it does have the same exact C-spec glitch where you can one-shot a bunch of NPCs if you group them up. Okami is going to be do not use just because it is very consistent overall. Paper is going to be unusable for farming. It actually has a lot of damage output. Atomic is going to be not very good for PvE. Pikaseco is actually going to be unusable for farming. After the nerfs, Pikaseco isn't nearly as good as it used to be for farming, but it still is decent for farming, so I'm going to put it unusable for farming above Ink and below Narmaki. Vine's going to be unusable for farming just because of the Vine clones. They're very good for farming in general. Ryan Akuma is going to be right next to Bankai, mainly for the same reason as Bankai. It has a lot of damage output and is very good for farming in general. Ryan Ren is actually going to be unusable for farming, probably honestly above Ink and below Pikaseco. Ryan Red's second mode is the main thing that's good for farming because it does a ton of damage. Rengoku obviously do not use for farming. It's definitely not good for that. Renchiki is actually going to be at the bottom of usable for farming. It actually does a lot of damage and has a big AoE overall. Raizukuma is going to be at the bottom of usable for farming. Probably, no, not at the bottom. Probably above Ink and below Ryan Ren. It isn't quite as good as the other Akumas for farming, but it still is decent. Raikish is obviously extremely good for farming. It's one of the highest DPS modes in the entire game, and the abilities are actually really good for farming as well. Shiz is actually going to be not so lucky, but I'm actually going to be putting it in usable for farming. It doesn't have nearly as much damage, which obviously is significantly worse, but it still is pretty good for farming, so I'm going to put it below Raizukuma. Aoyama Shizen is going to be one of the best PvE bloodlines of the game. It has a massive amount of damage output, has really good auto tracking, and it hits multiple times against bosses. It pretty much has everything you would want in a bloodline for farming. Ryuji Kenichi is going to be unusable for farming. Actually putting Ryuji Kenichi probably below Ghost Karashi above Vine. Mainly the second ability, that's mainly what you're going to be using. It does like over 100k damage. Sabrou is going to be a do not use for farming. Sand's going to be a do not use for farming. Sriracha is going to be the only Akuma not actually very good for farming. Just because the main thing of Sriracha you're going to be used for farming is the mode, and you have to farm to get the mode. So it's kind of just lackluster overall. Satori is going to be unusable for farming, mainly for, honestly, the weapon spec of the mode. It does a lot of damage. That's mainly the ability that's going to be carrying Satori when it comes to PvE. They should obviously do not use for farming. Sengoku is actually going to be very usable for farming. Actually putting Sengoku probably below Ryan Red and above Raizukuma. Sengoku overall is actually very usable for farming. Sekko's going to be not very good for PvE. Shadow's going to be do not use these for farming. Shindai Ren is actually going to be extremely good for farming. No, I'm going to put it in usable farming, probably honestly at the top. I feel like it doesn't have quite enough damage to be extremely good for farming. It doesn't have a glitch or anything like that, but it actually is very good for farming. It does a lot of damage, just not an extreme amount. Shindai Kuma is going to be unusable for farming. Actually putting Shindai Kuma probably right above Vine. It's mainly going to be for the same exact reason as Vine. Shiver Kuma is going to be not very good for PvE. It's just not good for PvE. There's not really much else to say about it. Smoke's going to be do not use these for farming. Actually, going to be bumping it up to not very good for PvE just because it has the movement. Sound's going to be not very good for PvE. Steam is obviously going to be going to the bottom. Storm, not very good for farming. Tengoku's actually going to be extremely good for farming. I'm putting Tengoku probably, honestly, below Iron State, above Kaijin. Overall, when Tengoku is actually used for farming, it actually is very good just because it has a lot of auto tracking abilities, just a lot of damage, and you'll pretty much hit every single ability against NPCs. Tsunami is actually very useful for farming. It has a lot of AoE and a lot of damage output. Typhoon's not so lucky, definitely going to be not very good for farming. Variety Mode is going to be do not use. Now, Exito Dokai is going to be in best PvE bloodlines, but is it going to be above Aoyama Shizen? No. I'm actually going to be putting it below Aoyama Shizen. I feel like Aoyama Shizen is now the best one because they actually nerfed Exito Dokai C-Spec a lot. They actually nerfed it, the duration by like half, so it's not nearly as good as it used to be, but it still is one of the best PvE bloodlines in the entire game. Glacier is going to be do not use for farming. Bankai Inferno is actually very usable for farming overall. I'm actually putting Bankai Inferno probably... I'll be putting it probably above Tsunami, below Vine. When it comes to Bankai Inferno, you're mainly going to be using the mode for farming, but it still is decent overall for farming if you're not using that. Doku Tengoku, obviously very usable for farming. The mode is extremely good just in general, so I'm going to actually be putting it probably above Sengoku, below Ryan Ren. Doku Tengoku's weapon spec is the main thing that's very good for farming. Satori Red is actually going to be unusable for farming. I should put Satori Red below Lava, but Paper, it's mainly going to be for the mode of Satori Red. Web, obviously not very good for PvE, but actually has a lot of movement abilities, so that's why it's going to be in this instead of do not use. Shiro Glacier, obviously extremely good for farming. I'm going to be putting it above Iron State, below Giovanni Shizen. It has a lot of damage output, and it's just good for farming in general. Anyways, guys, that's actually it for this video. If you guys enjoyed this video, hit that like, press the like more. 6 guys. Bye-bye.